see.
Yeah.
Okay, let's just start.
Okay. Sure.
Hey, everybody, welcome to a sneak peek of Positive Discipline. I'm Peyton Williams from Bowbend Consulting, and I am so excited to have a very special guest with us here today, Kimberly from Canada. Kimberly, why don't you introduce yourself?
Oh, I'm very thrilled to be here. I'd like to say now that I feel like I'm Peyton's friend. We met just last month in Atlanta at a positive discipline workshop where Peyton took that as becoming a positive discipline parent educator. And I happened to be so lucky to be facilitating and training the workshop. So I've been involved in positive discipline on school levels and parent levels now for about 3 years. And last year received my certification in training trainers. And I'm absolutely thrilled to be here. And of course, always working internationally is exciting.
Absolutely. Well, we're so glad you're here. And we are going to get going here. So, a quick disclaimer, I laughed. My parents are lawyers, and so they were like, you have to have this. Essentially, I'm not going to cure any ill you have. I can't promise that I have any doctor's degree, but what I do have is 16 years of educational experience. I'm a positive discipline trainer like Kimberly, at not quite to the level that she is, but we've got some background in that as well. And I'm a mom of three. And Kimberly, I forget, do you have kids? You do, don't you?
I have two teens. So I have a 14-year-old boy and a 16-year-old girl. And keeping positive discipline strategies and tools in mind, and just like the philosophy and mindset, because it's really not a program or say like curriculum if you were thinking about it in that way. It's really just kind of a bit of a mindset shift and philosophical approach with specific strategies and tools that are helpful.
Absolutely. Well, amen to that. So speaking of, kick off. For those of you who are not familiar with positive discipline, it is, as Kimberly said, a philosophy and an approach that is really helpful based on the work of Jane Nelson. And Kimberly, when did you first experience or get into positive discipline?
I think my first workshop was 2019, and a trainer came to our school, and I've been in international school teaching now for 20 something years. And we were living in Saudi Arabia, and so we had a consultant come and do a workshop for the ECE, so Early Childhood Education Center, and then also for all of the elementary school teachers. And I was coming as kind of like the consultant from the secondary school to scope it out and see like, would this be applicable and age appropriate for the secondary school, as I was the pedagogical coordinator for the school. And so I took it and said, yes, these tools, strategies, approach, and so forth work for the secondary, and then started like a long-term relationship with the consultant. Unfortunately, COVID hit, and then it became an online relationship, but stemming over the 3 years. And then kind of implemented it like throughout the school and school wide, and each of the grades, our at homeroom program, setting up like different activities, much like this 30-minute session. I created several 30-minute sessions for advisory over the whole year to like implement it into the school.
Well, and yeah, so if you think about it, one thing you said that's really, I think, really helpful is that a lot of times when I think about programs like this, I saw positive discipline when I was first. Also, I encountered it as a teacher, and I was like, that's for elementary school kids. That's for preschool kids. That's not going to work. But I can tell you, I've been using it with my upper elementary school kids, and I used a lot of the philosophies and approaches with my middle school kids.
Mm-hmm.
I wish I had been able to use them when I was teaching high school. It would have been a lot more helpful. I think I was a young dumb in my early 20s when I was teaching high school, and I wish I had this in my back pocket. So for parents who are like, yeah, I've got older kids, or man, the horse is out of the barn, like I can tell you from firsthand experience that this is applicable for all ages. And I would say even if you work with adults, you can use some of this stuff.
Absolutely. Yeah. That's what
So
I love the most about it, actually, is the idea that it is really about more empowered interactions with whomever you have them with. So like whatever human you are speaking to and interacting with and having a relationship with and connecting to, it's helpful. Because
Yeah.
again, it's a philosophical approach and mindset shift that like you have. So it informs how you kind of like go out in the world and the way that you are and the way that you interact with others, and that gets specific responses from people.
And that, yes. And so what we're going to try to do in these, 25 minutes that we have is summarize real briefly. Or rather, when I made this slideshow, I was like, okay, how can I take what I read in this book and what I know from my experience and do sort of the Venn diagram overlap to make it kind of easy? So I was like, all right, positive discipline kind of has, and these are all just my words summarizing. The last slide with the principles, we're going to get into kind of the catchphrases and the things that are like very, if you read the book, you're like, yes, that is it. But I tried to summarize in very layman's terms. Here's some big takeaways I had from reading this book, Positive Discipline. And it feels like there are three kind of ways of thinking. So there are some sort of beliefs or like the way that you think about things, as Kimberly said. Then there are some habits that you have where it's like, okay, well, people who believe this do this, right? And there are some things to establish. And then I laugh, like positive discipline is a very upstream approach, and we'll talk about that in a second. But it's like,
Mhm.
and then when like your kids sort of misbehave, you do have a couple responses in your back pocket, but it's more about the before the misbehavior happens than it is about the during the misbehavior or, in the middle. And so I like it for that too. So let's dive in a couple things that are really uh, just kind of key takeaways from the book for me. Kimberly, do you want to talk about this idea of belonging and significance? This was just a huge
Sure.
one.
Yeah. Okay, so I think one thing that's really important to note, and Jane Nelson would always note this, is that positive discipline she created and had a co-founder as well, like Lynn Lott, but they really based it on Alfred Adler and Rudolf Dreikurs, who were Austrian psychologists, and did a lot of research. So it's research based, but what Alfred Adler said is that all humans, and I think that this is what we know, is that all humans are looking for belonging and significance. So they need to have meaning. They need to be part of a group and feel like they have meaning. And that significance really comes through, actually, for the most part, contribution. So and there's inherent value and acceptance like into the group. And because of that, people want to contribute. And that just keeps kind of cycling on. Like the more you feel that sense of belonging and the more you have that sense of significance. So everyone is searching for that
Yeah.
and needs that to be kind of like healthy.
And so if you think as a parent, like what are my kids searching for? This was huge, right? It's like what do my kids want? They want to feel like they belong in our family and they want to feel like they can contribute and that they have significance. And so that's just an overarching sort of belief that like, okay, in positive discipline, if you think that people want this and that that is what they are striving for, then as a parent, you can help foster those things. And that was sort of revolutionary for me. And I spoke just a second ago about the Upstream. There's a new book, I think it's called Upstream, and it's by one of the Heath brothers, either Chip or Dan Heath. I'm not sure which one, but it talks about the story of like, y'all probably heard this about the babies. There are two people by a river and all of a sudden they see a baby in the water and they're like, oh my gosh, the baby. And they rescue the baby. And then here comes another baby and they rescue that baby. And then suddenly they're setting up a baby rescuing system, but they never ask, like, what's going on
Where
upstream where the baby, why are the
they're
babies in the
coming from.
water, right? And what I love about positive discipline is it gives you a couple tools for like, oh, the baby's in the water, let me grab it. But it's not focused on that. It's focused on stopping the baby from getting in the water in the first place.
Hmm.
And these sort of beliefs are sort of central to, okay, as a parent, how can I make sure that my kids are in a space of belonging and significance, because then they won't misbehave. And that gets us to that second belief that misbehavior for kids is a mistaken attempt at trying to feel belonging and significance.
Hmm.
Do you have anything you want to add on this one, Kimberly?
Um, nope, I think that you covered that.
Okay, awesome. Why don't you take kind and firm then? This is a big one, I feel like, that parents ought to be kind and firm.
You know, it's interesting because again, that's like an approach is that, and I always think kind and firm is that you connect with your child as far as um, validating feelings that they have, and at the same time, keeping high expectations. And I think that the kind is kind of supporting those high expectations so that you're both at the same time. Um, and not just too kind, because a lot of people hear positive discipline and they think that like, oh, that's really like permissive. It's too permissive. And then you have the other side. If you're only firm, then what is it that you like get from your children? What do you develop and so forth? So it's really working on that idea of being kind and firm at the same time. So an example would be, I love you and you need to do your homework or you need to follow through on this commitment. How might I help you with that? So, you know what, I also think of kind and firm when you talk about parenting, is that generally the way that parents work is one tends to be a little bit more kind and one tends to be a little bit more firm. And it takes a bit of art to master the idea of kind and firm at the same time. Because when one parent is like too kind and too permissive, the firm parent gets like more firm. And there's always this back and forth and compensating. And that's hard for kids in some ways because it's a little bit confusing. And then in some ways it's really easy because they're like, oh, I know which one to go to when, and like kind of how to play each other off, and causes a lot of tension in the family. So if both work on being kind and firm at the same time, um, the house is just much more peaceful.
Amen. And honestly, like I feel like kind and firm applies not just to parenting, but to leadership, right? Like as you mentioned in the beginning, it's sort
Absolutely.
of a way of I like it because this approach, if you study it and think about it, right, it makes you actually a better person, right? I can
Yeah.
have boundaries and also be kind, right? I don't have to be a jerk in my leadership. I can still get things done, right?
Mhm.
And I think that's one thing that if you believe that you can be both kind and firm, then you look for strategies and ways to do it. And
Right.
so um, I
Yep.
think this one was a little bit revolutionary for me because, I'm a big fan of consequences, or I was until I really got diving into, well, and consequences is sort of different, but right, this idea that like, okay, well, when you do bad things happen to you, right? But this idea that punishment, yeah, it works, but it works in short term,
Mhm.
right? And there's some
Right.
long term disadvantages to that. That was kind of revolutionary for me to think about.
I think it is. And one of like the principles, like kind of like no blame, pain or shame. So there's no punishment and positive discipline. And when people see that on the principles or they hear that, they're like, oh my gosh, then this like definitely can't work. Because if not punishment, then like what? And punishment really works. So and then you think, well, works for what? Well, it works for obedience and compliance. And yes, do you want that like in the moment? Potentially, but then like long term, like what are the unintended effects, and like what is it that you're actually really developing in your child? And there are 4 R's of punishment, and there's so much more that we can get into, but um yeah, no one can say that punishment doesn't work. It works, but like what does it get you?
Well, and I think too, this is where it gets another big belief of positive discipline is that children deserve your dignity and like they deserve that you treat them with dignity and respect, right? Just
Mhm.
like you as a parent deserve to be treated with dignity and respect. And I like this idea. I'm going to go through these next two and then we'll go to the next slide. But just this idea that it helped me reframe my thinking as a parent
Mhm.
from like my job is to make my children do things into more like, all right, positive, excuse me, punishment is a little bit of a downstream thing, right? It's like the baby's already in the water, like you've got to, they're misbehaving, I'm responding to that, that's a punishment, it's going to stop the baby from getting in the water right there, but like it doesn't solve that long-term problem, right? Same thing when you think about how am I treating my child with dignity, how am I treating them with respect, how can I sort of be a coach as opposed to the person who makes things happen? That those belief shifts really help me be more kind and firm as a parent. Um,
Mm,
and so I think, when I think about sort of those were my big takeaways from reading the book in terms of just like ways of thinking about being
right.
that changed. Did you have any that were particularly interesting to you as a parent or as an educator?
Um, I think they might be coming up on like
Okay.
kind of the slides coming up, but one thing I was going to add with dignity and respect, that kind of that belief is more of like a horizontal relationship. And that really scares again some parents of like, oh my gosh, like no, I'm the boss and you're not. But you kind of think like at work you have a boss, but the relationship, your hope for the relationship is more horizontal versus hierarchical in the way that they interact with you and respect you, and you expect dignity as far as like a human being at work. So the expectation for your smaller human and younger human is kind of the same based on Adler's work.
Yeah. When I think too, yeah, that scares me. It also makes me go, it's not going to work. Like, I'm still going to do this. But I think, like, for those of you who are like, all right, I'm about to tune out, this sounds too soft.
Yeah,
It's just a tool set. So keep doing what you're doing with the other stuff. Why not? Like, you don't have to be like, I'm only committing to positive discipline and I will never, right? Like, I would say it's a journey, it's a process, and you're going to get to a place where you realize, oh, I don't have to do that stuff. Or, oh, yes, this totally works. But for me, like, I was like, I'm still going to punish my kids and I'm still going to have consequences. And sometimes I still do. Let's be honest, nobody's perfect. But
right.
when I use this stuff, I have to do it less. And so the more good I get at doing this, the less I have to use the stuff that doesn't work long
Right.
term and all that kind of stuff too. So
Respect is also for yourself too. Like you teach your kids to have respect for themselves, but it's also respect for you. So that kind and firm, like I love you, and you still need to meet these expectations as to whatever they are. Or yeah, just that idea of like boundaries. So one of the tools is like decide and then follow through. So like as a parent, this is what I'm going to do. I'll support you. And these are kind of my boundaries and around the support. So it's not just like a one-way thing of dignity and respect. Like you have to respect your child in a horizontal relationship and so forth. It is um individual respect, like respect for yourselves, respect for others, like all the things that you really want for your kids. And we just don't necessarily think about it in parenting because we really think it's a top down. Traditionally, it's top down.
well, and I think too, that's interesting, right? If you think of yourself, like if it's a little more horizontal, it also doesn't mean that the kid is the boss. And that's a problem in a lot of houses, right? The kid
True.
becomes the boss. And it's like, no, no, no,
Mhm.
no, no. Like the parent is still the parent. You
Yes.
are in your role as parent. You're just doing it a little bit differently than maybe you did before. And you're not letting them take over, which I think is
Right.
a misconception. So then if we think about some things, okay, yes, we believe these things. So then what does that mean for kind of our daily lives as parents? Some things that in positive discipline you do. And I like to think of these as the very upstream parenting things. These are not necessarily the things you do in the moment when your kid is having a meltdown in the grocery store and screaming and saying no, 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 or when your teenager sneaks out. These are things you do before or a good bit after
Mhm.
that will help prevent the problem next time, right? So, training and routines. Kimberly, do you want to talk about any of those as some habits that people who do positive discipline use?
Um, well, and again, the idea of training is that you're teaching, like you're taking the challenges that your children present as opportunities to actually teach for the life skills and the characteristics that you want them to have long term. Um, and that takes time. So you think like we do a lot as parents for our kids because it's faster, it's easier, it's less headache. There's, I'll just do it because I can do it. But you think like, what are you developing and teaching like in your child for your child? And so really the upstream part like does take a little bit more time, but it gets easier and faster as you go along because there seems to be like less problems in the future. So really like taking that on as the idea of, I know that I need to put a little bit of time in at the front for training or like teaching to the things that I want my children to like have. And one of the ways to do that is to really to create kind of like routine charts. Because belonging and significance, going back to that, the idea is that you're really creating capability and independence for your child. And that can happen through the training and routines.
Right. So if I'm taking away as a parent, okay, what, I've got an 11-year-old, they leave their dishes out all the time. And a lot of times I just come on behind them and clean them on
Yeah.
up. Right? And it bugs me and I nag them and we're fighting about it. And it's like, right. Okay, let's go a little upstream. How can I teach my child about doing their own dishes? How can I set a routine? Right. And then suddenly that issue is not an issue anymore. Right. Um,
Right.
I think another habit that I thought was cool and I was very skeptical of, but we've started doing in our family and I've been amazed at how helpful it
Mm,
is the idea of family meetings. And this,
mm,
that and we'll go deeper into this in our summits, but it's more like you get a chance as a family to sit down, problem solve together, complement each other, and have fun together. And there are three sort of magic things. There's these steps you can go through. It's very laid out and very scripted for you, so that if you want to do it that way, you can. And
mhm.
if you follow the compliments, problem solving with an agenda, and then some fun. I mean, honestly, I was completely floored by how taken my children are with having family meetings. And we've done a couple already, and I was so skeptical, and it's been really game changing for the tone of our family.
And I would say that earlier you start and the more you do them. And if family meeting sounds too bureaucratic in some ways, then just like connection time or and just starting just with pieces of that versus kind of like the whole script, to be developmentally like adding on at times, can all be very helpful. Again, it's really a lot about connection and relationship and building more. And so when you talk and spend time together, and especially the element of having more fun and the element of appreciation, then you're already like a couple steps ahead of where you were before.
I think two other habits, and then because we're going to run out of time, man, there's so much to talk about, right? But it's like, so two other habits that we have, and then we'll get into the some responses and principles, but that parents are encouragers and not praisers. So we're looking for ways that our children are doing well and we're building on their strengths. And then I think the second one, and then we'll move on real quick, is just that when you're in that moment of heat, right, with your kids. And for me, it's always me. Like they're hot, but I'm like on fire, right?
Right.
When they're being bad. Wait, let that admit, like this the reason I love this approach too is that it's so based on brain research that it's like you make very bad decisions when you are emotionally dysregulated, and that this really teaches, okay, take a positive time out, take a minute to cool yourself off. You don't have to discipline right in the moment. You can both get calmed down, and that habit is actually pretty game changing for families because you're teaching kids how to respond in a way that's positive when they're having conflict. Anything else on those two things before we move on?
Um, yeah, just the idea of encouragement of that mindset set shift of like encouragement, not punishment, like your encouragement based of like, how do I get more and better in this relationship that we're having, with those high expectations of what you want for your kids, and not necessarily doing it through punishment. And then that positive timeout is, I think what Peyton is saying too, is like, it's for her. And I think my 14-year-old boy sometimes is like, it's not that deep. Like he says that it's not that deep when I start getting like a little bit riled up. And I think like breathe. And then like I take the time and then we talk about it in a more regulated way later.
Yeah. It's just like, I remember somebody was like, Peyton, you just need to be the parent. And I was like, sometimes I show up more as the toddler than the parent. And so
Mhm.
it helps me be the parent instead of being the toddler. So, okay, a couple a couple responses that we have. We've got positive timeout. Obviously, we talked a little bit about that. That's sort of just instead of timeout punishment, it's like take a timeout to regulate yourself. Limited choices. You know, you can. I love this one because it does allow that authority in the parent, right, to be like, you can do this or you can do this. Both of them are acceptable to me, but it
Yeah.
allows your kid some choices, and that works for all ages.
Right. And that idea of like you choose, like you're in control in general. Parents think they're in control and yet internally like don't necessarily feel that sense of control, but they're like they know they're supposed to have it. So like that deciding what you will do and following through and giving the limited choices and saying like this or this, you choose, like you have the power or the control in this moment.
Can you talk a little bit more about the deciding what you will do? That's sort of a way as a parent to think about, okay, in this moment, all right, my child has said, no, I am not going to do the dishes. Okay, what is decide what you will do? What does that response look like in that moment?
Oh, that's a like tough one because I'm not sure that necessarily. Um, I think that that one goes like more is linked to like the routine chart or, you know, like what comes next. And I would use a tool of like when this, like when the dishes are done, then this can happen. But the deciding what you will do and following through, it's as a parent. And so you think of like um, it's really, I think this one is around a preventative of kids coming to you at the last minute and saying like, but now I need you to do this. And it's like, well, when did you find out about that? And, you know, so kids have had the lead up, say like homework, like now a big project is due. And then the child wants the help on that and really setting up before of like, I will do like this and this for you, say on these nights. Like if you want help with your homework, I will help you on like Tuesday and Thursday nights because that's the most free time in our family. And then the idea is you follow through so that like the children start to plan and organize, and those are life skills and characteristics that you want for them long term. Um, and that when they come to you last minute, do you come in, say on a Friday or a Sunday night before like Monday school, do you come in and rescue them? Or do you stick to the idea of like you're respecting yourself, you're respecting them, and knowing that they're capable to come to you on Tuesday and or Thursday to get the help that they need. And there are more things in place in that, but and I don't know. I'm a mom, so that's the experience I have, but moms tend to be like rescuers of like I'll like, oh my gosh, it's a panic, you're in a panic. So now I'll start panicking and I'll just do this for you. But then there's also a bit of resentment of like, but we talked about this and I told you this and like why didn't you do this? And so there's a little bit of that lecture and resentment that comes versus setting up beforehand and saying and kind of like talking this through of helping teaching planning and organization, like what do you have up this week? Remember, I'm available to help you on Tuesday and Thursday. Should we set a time for that? Do you want help for that? And then if they come on the Sunday night and saying like it's a really busy time with your siblings or as a family, and like tonight's not going to work, but I can help you Tuesday.
Right.
That was
And
long. I'm
you'll
sorry.
also have to then have the consequence of maybe Monday your homework isn't done the way that you wanted it to be, but that is not my job. Right. We have talked
Yeah,
about how I can help you. And so I think there's a lot of beautiful firmness in that too, right? Where it's like you allow
you
your
frozen.
children to I'm frozen. Okay, well, let's just see what happens. Can
Okay.
you see mutual respect now? Or the principal?
Yeah.
Okay. So to kind of close then, oh man, we're already a minute over, but principles for positive discipline, these are kind of some biggies. We've talked about a lot of them. Are there any that we need to just like finalize real quick before we go?
I think that we talked a lot about everything. These are just like the bottom three are, I think, common phrases to keep in mind that help you remember that little bit of mindset shift. So connect before correct is that kind and firm. So connecting is validating feelings, acknowledging and appreciating, and still saying, like, this is where we need to be, this is what we need to be doing in order to, not that I have control over you, in order to meet expectations for the life skills and characteristics that I want you to develop. Again, and then it's like kind of like me, like I want you to, in order to sort of get that sense of belonging and significance within the group that you're in, whether it be the family or the classroom or the community at large. Curious, not furious is thinking about asking questions. So that's a specific tool in thinking when you want to like come down on your child and be directive, and you've interpreted something, and so you kind of start to lecture again or whatever. Really switch that mindset and then get out of the instant furious mode. And that might take that positive time out on your own of thinking like, I might need time away, they might need time away, and I come back and ask questions. So curious, not furious, I think is a super helpful just phrase for your own mindset. And then thinking like focusing on solutions, that we encounter problems every single day. Nagging, lecturing, rescuing, all of those kind of things that we do on a regular basis, they don't make us feel good necessarily. They don't make our children feel good necessarily. And they're not long-term focused. It will most likely happen again unless we start to think about like, how do we focus on solutions? How do we joint problem solve? And just having conversations around that.
That one, I wish we'd spent more time on that one. That one has been game changing for me too as a parent, just to think about, okay, all right, kiddos, we've got a problem. Can you help me come up with some solutions? And when they are involved in solution finding, we do a lot better as a family.
Right. And it's absolutely imperative, if you think people do better when they feel better. That's all humans. It's not just children, it's ourselves as well. Like, we do better when we feel better. And so Adler said, like, and Jane Nelson has followed up, like, where in the world did we think that people were going to do better when we make them feel worse? And in general, if you think about our traditional approaches with children, we make them feel worse and then we expect better from them. And as we're doing that, and as we're giving the punishments, we feel worse ourselves as parents, and then think, are we really doing better?
Usually not, or at least maybe in the quick moment, but long term, we circle back around, right? And so that's what I love about this, is it really is that long term approach. Well, we are out of time now, but we've got Kimberly and I are gonna work together a little bit. She's gonna help me out to do a
Very
summit
excited.
for dads September 15th. If you're interested, go to Bobin Consulting and we can, or you can, email me. Also, the book by Jane Nelson is a great resource, but there are so many wonderful things. Kimberly, I know
Absolutely.
you've got stuff that you do too as well. Also, if you have feedback for us on this, please scan that QR code, give us some feedback. This will be up on YouTube if you missed it and want to share it with somebody. I've got a podcast that I use called What Great Teachers Know That All Parents Can Use. We're dropping a new episode on grading on August 15th. It's going to be great. And then next week at our workshop, I've got the golden system with some great friends coming in to talk about executive function. So any of that, we'd love to see you there. Otherwise, thanks for being here and we appreciate you.